Great, thank you. Thanks, Prathy, for the introduction. Thank you for welcoming me to the Power BI user group tonight. So I was just talking to a few colleagues earlier as well. It was probably back in March, April time that I was first asked to present a slot, and I must have changed my mind about 27 times as to what I was going to talk about today. So in the end, I've actually thought I'm going to keep it quite broad, and I'm really going to focus on what is it that I use Power BI for on a daily basis. And ultimately, it's about creating an impact with data. So Power BI is obviously a broad tool. It's been around for a few years now. There's an awful lot of focus on the technology that sits behind it. Just like most of you in the room probably get quite excited once a month when the tweets come out about the new release and we all look through all the features. But I think, actually, what's the point of all of that unless we use it to do something that really makes a difference and actually creates an impact with the data that we're using? The perspective that I'm going to talk to you about today as well is very much from a public sector point of view. So I've been an analyst for 15 years. So 2003, I started my career. I've always been a data analyst since I left university, and I've always worked within the public sector as well. So I work for a private sector consultancy currently. So I work for itelligent-i as the Analytics Director, but very much about applying analytics in the public sector. The examples that we've already talked about today, so cycling routes and house prices paid, all that sort of data that the government publishes on a regular basis, there's so much to it, and it can really make such a difference. And my journey with Power BI has really helped me to recognise actually how tools within the stack can start to really make a difference about how we pull that together and start people taking notice of it a bit more as well. I know there's a few people in the audience that are working within the public sector and appreciate some of the challenges that come from working with data as well. So I'm going to talk you through my journey really and how I've used tools like Power BI, well, Power BI predominantly in the last few years, to actually start to get people talking about what the data is telling them more than the problems with it, the data quality, the spreadsheets that they can't send around, the databases they can't get access to. And actually, things I've learned along the way that mean that we've been able to have some very different conversations about the data and really shift the emphasis onto, actually, it's about the analytics, about the insight. Let's stop talking about databases and can we get a connection to X, Y, and Z? And actually, how can we use this data to make a difference to the people that we're here to support as well? So I'm kind of regretting this pitch now. I've seen the size of the screen. But so the reason I put this up is this is what I spend an awful lot of my time doing, is not just talking, but actually supporting people to understand the benefits of Power BI. So as a small consultancy, we spend an awful lot of time around the country helping people to understand, actually, first of all, what it is. Most people don't really understand that there are these advanced tool sets out there in terms of manipulating, analysing, and presenting your data. Public sector especially, you walk into any local council, most of them starting their journey towards Windows 10, for example. It's not something that everybody has naturally at their fingertips. And a lot of organisations as well don't always appreciate that their data is a valuable asset that they're sitting on as well. So what we find is that individuals know they need to do something better with their data. They know they've got stuff there and people are talking about it, but actually they don't appreciate what the new skills are they need to do things with it. They don't really appreciate what's involved in getting them from where they are currently to where they know they can be. So a lot of my time is spent helping people to understand the art of the possible, but then also supporting them about how they can start that journey and get somewhere where they're starting to really make a difference with it. So this is what I actually like to think I do, and it's to help people navigate those really difficult decisions that they have to make on a regular basis. So the strap line for our organisation is about being data-driven. Do you want to be a data-driven organisation? I think it probably seems a bit of a no-brainer for those of us that work with data on a regular basis, but actually it's about helping people realise that when they are faced with difficult decisions, and the public sector has many of them every day, you have a finite budget, you have a huge demand. That demand is constantly changing and can be really, really complex. And how do you know you're making the right decision on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual, 10-yearly basis? And actually, what's the role that data, and more importantly, insights, play in supporting people to make those decisions moving forward? So ultimately, I am an analyst, and I use tools to do my job and to support people to get the most out of their data, but actually it's about how we can present and have a conversation about what those analytics are telling people as well. So this is a bit of a cheesy slide, so apologies for the little roadmap there, but I was reflecting actually on how long I've been using Power BI for and where it started to come into my journey as an analyst. So Like I say, I actually started back in 2003 and I worked for Staffordshire Police as a crime analyst. And the tools we had available to us were Excel and business objects. I don't know how many of you are aware of business objects as a tool, but it's one of those that you have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. So at the time, I thought it was great because I had direct access to seemingly the data from 3 or 4 different line of business systems. I could run reports. I then extracted it, saved it in an XLS file, mashed it together in Excel, produced lots of what I thought at the time were quite, important analytics. And it was probably only after about 6 months of being in that role, I realized, hang on, I'm doing this over and over again. I'm running the same reports. I'm always having to save a copy of it, and my folder's growing and growing and growing. The work that I do on a routine basis was starting to take up more and more of my month. And I was thinking, I don't know how long I can keep doing this for, because at the time, I was starting to do things that I thought were having an impact. We're looking at trends in things like youth offending. We're looking at things like substance misuse within particular hotspot areas where we know there's also deprivation. And then a question had come back about, well, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. Help me understand who those people are, how frequently it's happening, what else do we know about them? And you just feel really constrained by the tools that you have. So I worked for the police for about 4 years, and during that time I started to get more interested in the strategic use of data. So yeah, I can send you bits of information. I'd have constant knocks on my door from the local inspector that was asking for what was my detection rate yesterday, is it better than my fellow inspector, and a bit of competition that I could see that data was creating. But actually I was more interested in how we can use that to inform the direction of the organisation over the coming years. Spent quite a bit of time working with the senior command team actually about redesigning what the whole policing structure should be for the force. So how can we use data to better understand where we should mobilise local policing teams, where we should put our response vehicles when they're not on their patrols, and how we can start to use data to actually inform strategy over a longer period of time. And those sort of projects take a really long time because you spend half of it actually just trying to understand where the data's held, which business objects reports do I need to run, putting a request into ICT because I couldn't find it in the reporting layer, no access to the universes, all that sort of usual thing. It was after about 4 years, I was working in that more strategic space, and after about 4 years I joined the county council in a strategic analytical role, and oh boy, did it get worse. So I thought, the council, they'll have access to various systems, and most local authorities actually operate as about 10 or 15 individual businesses all in one. And it's really quite fascinating actually when you work in the public sector and recognise no business would set themselves up like this. You've got a licensing department, highways, children's social care, public health, all sitting together seemingly under one organisational structure. But they're very, very disparate in the way they operate, but actually the crossovers between the people they're supporting couldn't be more aligned. And it was very, very difficult to move into a space where I'd been working very clearly in a very specific subject area, suddenly having to work across this whole broad range of services and having access to zero data. So I had no access to any line of business systems, didn't even have business objects. I started to miss it. That's crazy talk. But I was working in an environment where I had to email people. I had to pick up the phone and say, I need some information on children in need. I need to know how many people we're supporting in adult social care. And somebody in that team would run me a report, email it across. 3 weeks later, look at it. I'd go, okay, but I haven't got these columns. I'd have to go back, have that conversation about it. And it was at that point really where we started to appreciate there's something here that's not quite right. So we've got the analytical skill. We're working at a senior level to understand what are those real burning questions that you need better insight to inform, but the tools and the way we're operating just isn't supporting us in that space. It was around, 2013, I started using, late 2013, that's a push really, 2014, started using Excel 2013. That was a big deal in the council. I think I had Excel 2007 for a very long time. Managed to befriend somebody in ICT that got me an upgrade, and all the add-ins that came with it, so Power Query, Power Pivot. And it was at that point where we started, so I was working for the council at this time, and itelligent-i came and did some work with us to support us to produce a data strategy for the organisation. So all those challenges that I've talked about, we started to say, well, actually, if we could do this better, and if we could do this from a blank sheet of paper, actually, how would we approach creating analytics that drive decision-making, but from the bottom up? So it's at that point that I started to explore, actually, there's a different way of manipulating data here. I don't just have to open a spreadsheet and do stuff to it within Excel, the concept of relational databases and actually modeling data is all very new to me at the time. I've always been an analyst first and a user of technology second. So it really opened my eyes to the possibilities and actually how we could start to use the Power BI tools, as they weren't quite called at that stage, to really start making a difference. And the key thing with Excel was obviously that it included Power View, as it was back in those days. Nearly forgot the name then. And interactive visualizations. And I remember the first time we started actually looking at those, completely blew people away that you could interact with somebody in that way, let alone the automation that came with it, but the fact that you had the choice as the end user to do your own data discovery. And that really was the first step towards recognizing the impact that visualization has and the ability for end users to get their own hands on it. So I was one of the first people to have Power BI Designer installed on my laptop as well. That didn't last very long, did it? It was very, very pretty at the time. And I remember downloading this and just getting really carried away at the art of the possible. But we were still really hampered by the fact that, yeah, we got all this data, but it was still extracts. I was still having to save it on my local drive. Didn't trust that my colleagues wouldn't mess it up, so I'd save a copy myself in a locked away space where nobody else could touch it. Our drives as a team were just starting to grow exponentially. However, it was that point where we really recognized there's something here that can really change the way that we operate as a team. Not just about how we handle the data, but how we can drive more insight from it more quickly. And my approach as an analyst has always been, just show me the data, I just want to see it, I want to get my hands on it, I want to understand what's in there, and then I want to use that insight to help me decide how I'm going to use this and work with the business to understand what their questions are around it. And it was at that point, so I left the council back in 2.5 years ago. Feels longer ago than that, and joined itelligent-i as a business intelligence consultant. And it was at that point where Power BI, I think Power BI was released, was it July 2015, 16, 15? And it was at that point I've been using it ever since. So it was really very much about the journey that I've been on to help, okay, first of all, there's tools here that can do things different, and actually I've been doing things the hard way for a very long time. And then recognizing that there's this real ecosystem out there that just really supports people to interact with data in a very, very different way. I've always been very, very passionate about good data visualization. I worked with a guy back in when I was at the council who actually really enlightened me as to what makes a difference. So I've always been naturally had a tendency towards the design side of visualization, but it was working with somebody else that had been there and done it for a number of years that actually helped me realize why it makes a difference and how people relate and communicate with data in a different way. And Power BI as a tool has just really enabled me to bring that element out of my role as an analyst, but use it to start driving very, very different conversations. So this is a slide that I use with our team quite frequently, actually. So we have a number of analysts that work with us, and I help them to understand, actually, why is this so important in what we do? So the public sector, as most of you are aware, have pressures on them from funding point of view, but mostly from a demand point of view. So local government touches all of our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. Some of us have more interactions, some of us have fewer interactions. If you've got kids, chances are you have more interactions because they're attending school. Those of us that are in employment perhaps have some interaction in our early years and then as we get older as well. But the public sector is very, very broad in the services that it offers. And as I mentioned earlier, leaders are really, really challenged with the decisions that they have to make on a regular basis. And there's such a massive opportunity here for good insights to really support making a difference. It's real problems that affect real people every day. And I think we can become a little bit blasé about it when we see numbers in a spreadsheet or numbers in a database. There was a guy I worked with at the police when I first joined, and I think it was on my second day. He says, "Come with me, get in my car." It's like, where are we going? Do I need to sign something for this? But he took me on one of his patrols with him. So he was an antisocial behaviour officer, and he patrolled one of our known hotspots for antisocial behaviour in one of the boroughs. And he took me out and he showed me what he thought was contributing towards that. So things like Palisade shopping areas where there was patches of grass. He said, anywhere there's a patch of grass, you're going to get peaks in antisocial behaviour. Because anywhere where there's a bit of cover where people can go and stand, anywhere there's a cut through, an alleyway, and just getting that real context of actually what's going on and relating what the data says to the situational occurrences, it really starts to connect your brain with actually this isn't just numbers. You can become a little bit blunt about it, I think. I remember sitting around a table and people were talking about oh, we've had an increase in burglary. Oh, it's all right, it's only burglary, it's not serious crime. And you think, actually, if that burglary affected me, what does that mean for me in my life and my family's life as well? And so I think it's really important that we always connect the data to the subject matter and make sure that we're kind of carrying that with us as we do the analysis. But from a public sector and specifically a local government point of view, we know there's an increase in population. People are living much longer. It's not necessarily that more people are being born, but we know that people are living to much later age. However, we also know that people aren't living those years in particularly good health. So people are retiring at the same sort of age, but they're living many, many, many more years, but more likely to need some sort of support as they age as well. And we hear an awful lot about adult social care and the pressures on carers in particular. But then, you know, who talks about potholes? Everybody whinges about potholes. The people that have to look after our elderly community also have to mend the roads as well. Where would you rather they spent their money? Looking after elderly relatives or fixing the potholes so that you don't have to replace your tyres every 12 months. Children's services as well is one of the big areas, and actually from our experience we're starting to see children's social care starting to overtake adult services in terms of the priority. And that's because we've just got so many children that the data is showing they're experiencing multiple issues. So previously we've looked at them perhaps in silos, so we've looked at children that aren't attending school frequently, we've looked at those that are at risk through safeguarding issues. Well, actually the data's helping us to recognise those children in those particular environments are at risk because of various family circumstances. So chances are their parents are out of work, there might be mental health or substance misuse issues as well. And it's a really broad range of complex issues that when you look at a balance sheet as a director and you say, right, I've got to save £5 million next year, where do you take that money from? And how can we make better use of data to start driving those conversations? And actually a table in a spreadsheet isn't going to do that. We need more creative ways of encouraging people to focus on the right areas, but also give them the information they need every day just to do their job operationally. I'm going to show you some Power BI stuff in a minute, so apologies. This slide here, so this is what we talk to our customers about in terms of how we apply thinking and data. And actually, I think, I was reflecting on this a couple of days ago, I think it's very, very easy to apply tools like Power BI to that information layer. So when we talk about information, it's about, we particularly don't talk about data because people think of data in systems. They think of a line of business system that every day collects data about interactions. Well, actually, within every organisation, information can exist in any capacity. So we've got open data, we've got primary research, local authorities love doing a good survey. More and more, we're using social networks. We've always got a spreadsheet hanging around. It's amazing, actually, the amount of spreadsheets that exist because a line of business system can't capture that data. So it's too difficult to make a change. Let's just record it in a spreadsheet. We've got APIs. We use a lot of data from places like the Met Office, open data networks, PDF documents. We've done some work looking at scanned images of invoices. You know, information exists everywhere. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago when somebody asked me if we'd incorporated emergency presentations into some homelessness analysis. And I went, well, no, we haven't. And where do you record that? She goes, we've got a book. So when people come in and we write down their emergency presentation, can you show that in my Power BI report? I was like, well, in theory, yes, but we perhaps need to look at how you're capturing that data as a priority. But it exists all over the place. And I think in terms of turning data into something that we can automate, Power BI fits there very, very well. But actually, where we always take it to, or where we strive to take it to, is that insight level. And this is about, as it says, analytical interpretation of that. As organisations grow, as the volume of customers and interactions grows, it's really easy just to start drowning in data. I think we did over 800 Power BI reports for our customers last year, and you imagine just even the volume of reports, the volume of apps that people are starting to interact with. If we're not careful, they're very, very quickly going to be getting to the point where they stop looking at them because there's just too many. And actually, it's really key that we turn that data into actionable insight and start to wean people off some of their comfort blanket spreadsheets and get them to focus on the areas that actually can really make a difference. And the intelligence box is a different colour for a reason, so not the business intelligence interpretation, but actually from a subject matter expertise point of view, actually I've got the insight now, how do I apply my intelligence to make a better decision with that information? It's difficult to do when you've just got the information. When it's translated into insight, you're suddenly much more empowered to make better decisions with all of that. So in terms of what it means to who we work with on a regular basis, so this is just what I've been talking about really. This is very, very common in terms of the people that we're supporting to move them away or move them on their data journey. Huge amounts of spreadsheets, huge amounts of business object reports, huge amounts of access. It makes me shudder when I think of it. Loads of access databases, various reporting tools. And there's nothing wrong with having a mixed environment when it comes to business intelligence, but when you've got that very, very siloed, it's very difficult to get a single version of the truth. And actually what we're talking about is taking that. Yeah, you need access to your data, but actually you need to understand what it's telling you, and you need to translate that in a way that I know I can open up this report, I can understand what the key priorities are for me this month, but I also know that I can drill down and get the detail if I need it. So really we look at taking individual organisations on a journey from largely what they have on the left-hand side of the screen and evolving it to something that's a bit more intelligent in terms of how they can actually apply their thinking to what the insights are telling them. So, key principles to make an impact. I set myself up here because when Prathi asked me for my presentation themes, I said, I'm going to talk about my top 10 tips. And I sat down and was thinking about them, and I was like, why did I say 10? I've got to think of 10 tips. And the more and more I thought about it, actually, they all largely fit together in the same sort of groups. And actually, what I've devised is 3 key principles. Those 10 sort of, I think there's about 12 actually that fit within those. But I think on reflection, these principles are ones that I follow every time that I pick up a new piece of analysis. And actually, it's really about how you can use those and reflect on those to approach your work perhaps in a slightly different way. So like I say, I'm an analyst. I'm approaching this very much from an analytical point of view, and Power BI supports me to do that. So some of these aren't very, very Power BI specific, but I will show some Power BI examples to show what I mean by some of those as well. So the first one is about connecting with your subject matter, and I'm really, really passionate about this. That very first day or second day that police officer took me out on his rounds actually has fundamentally made a difference to the way I do my job. So very much about spending time just understanding how the organisation works, thinking about, actually, okay, I get the data, I get how the tables are related, I get all the flaws in how the system captures it and where it duplicates everything in the back end when somebody gets impatient and hits the button 17 times. But actually, how does that relate to the process that everybody goes through every day? There's some work that I did, and this is what I'm going to show you next actually, with the housing teams at a local London Borough Council, and just sitting down with them and saying, right, talk me through, somebody comes to your desk with this issue, talk me through the process that they go through, and talk me through the complexities of that as well, and you end up with huge line charts all over the boards and post-it notes everywhere. But actually, when you sit down then and look at that data, it suddenly means something so much more as well, and you've also got a great friend you can go back and ask when it doesn't quite make sense. But actually understanding the subject matter has fundamentally made me a better analyst, and it's making my team of analysts better at what they deliver as well. It just genuinely means something different. So this here, I did not do. How many times do we see something like this and people look at it and go, oh, that's not something like we've seen before, that looks a bit whizzy and we can see all the dancing graphs. Actually, I think on the surface, some of these things can impress quite quickly, but actually I think this is really quite horrible. Really do not like this. The colours don't really work. There's lots of stuff on there that to me is just meaningless. And I think it's so easy to start spending time pulling things together and kind of making them look a bit whizzy. I mean, I do like these little spark lines in the right sort of context, but I'm not going to sit down with people every time and explain what Q/Q means, or actually what that 1% means in relation to what, it's all about context. And actually to the audience that this was intended for, they just went, oh, right, okay, yeah, so we've implemented that, next. So tell me, what are the problems, where do we need to focus? And this just isn't doing the job. And what I strive to really achieve with how we deliver our analytics is to go, yeah, there's lots of flashy stuff you can do with it, but actually how do we really work with the business area to say, what's your process and how can I guide you through to help you better understand the priorities for your particular area? So this is the bit where I have to switch. Also, a little disclaimer as well, I'm having to use a trackpad on my laptop, so apologies if the right-clicking goes a bit awry. So the first set of reports I'm just going to show you is that homelessness example that I talked about previously. And when we talk about homelessness, an awful lot of people jump to thinking of rough sleepers, walking around London, you see people that are rough sleeping all the time, and it is clearly a big problem. Homelessness to local authorities is so much more than that as well. So the definition of homelessness from a local authority point of view is those that have an immediate housing need. So it might be that you're about to be evicted, your tenancy is going to expire, you've got nowhere else to go. It might be that your parents have chucked you out because you're pregnant. Homelessness is something that is talked about a huge amount. And at this council in particular, it was seen as an absolute epidemic. So when we first walked in, everybody's saying, we've got this massive problem with homelessness, the numbers are going through the roof, we don't quite know what we're supposed to do in terms of reacting to that. I can't get the data out of the system, it's full of data quality issues. And so this was, funnily enough, one of the first priorities that we looked at in terms of our analytics to support that decision making. So this started with saying, well, okay, talk me through your process. Well, first of all, when anybody presents to the organisation, they have to fill in an application form, and we assess that application to understand, are we going to put you on our homelessness list, or are we going to give you some further information, advice and guidance and try and sustain your tenancy longer term? So first of all, let's just start with understanding what are those volumes that come through the door. So very, very simple in terms of volumes over time, drilling right down into week. We can then drill right down into day, the usual sort of hierarchy. But it's one of those examples where they'd never had anything like this. They'd had numbers in a spreadsheet. They could tell you month on month how many had come through the door, but they just didn't connect to it in any sort of real way. Those numbers just all started to blur into each other. And how do you make that comparison between 50 and 70 next to each other? Well, actually, when you see it starkly in front of you, people very much started having a different conversation about it. What also started to add value as well was introducing just some real basic stats aligned to it. So the bottom line here shows the trends, the rolling 12-week average and a trend associated with that. It's always very tempting just to stick a trend line on any sort of time series visualization, but actually, is it looking at peaks and troughs in terms of seasonality? Working for the police really drilled that into me, because you get so much seasonality associated with crime and antisocial behaviour. It almost wasn't worth looking at monthly data unless you had some sort of control around it. But what was most interesting about this first piece, so you can see here, this is page 1 of, I think there's about 7 on this page, but this was one of about 5 different reports. We sat and talked about this for an hour. And the main reason for that was this donut chart in the bottom right-hand side as well. So if we filter that graph purely for those applications that have been completed, we can see the values are actually a bit more stable, less fluctuations. If we look at those that are rejected and saved, it was interesting that the numbers that the Director for Homelessness had been provided with included all of those categories. So when he was looking at his potential demand coming through the front door, actually 13% of those applications were rejected, and these are system rejects as well, so not a human rejecting the application. 19% of them were saved, so somebody had started to make that application, but they hadn't then continued with it as well. So my brain straight away goes to, well, if they've saved it, that means it's coming. You know it's coming, so actually why don't we pay a bit more attention to those and understand actually what's the average time it takes for somebody to complete an application, and when might we expect that to actually land in your inbox as well. So very quickly we started to have a conversation about, well, why is the system rejecting 13% of all of our applications? Turns out there was an upgrade at some point in the year, and all of a sudden it started duplicating and then chucking out and rejecting applications as well. So from a very, very simple starting point, we started to actually understand where do we need to focus, and can we ensure that we're looking at these completed applications as a priority. The next stage then within the process is about those that are put on the homelessness list. So we know there's a number that we're going to give advice and guidance to, but actually there's a number here where we're going to actually support them in a bit more detail. And here we can see there's actually a bit more of a downward trend. So this chart in the bottom left-hand corner has actually got some normal ranges within it. So we can see the moving average, which is the blue dotted line, but then we've also got upper and lower boundaries associated with it as well. Rather than reacting, so we've got some big peaks and troughs within that data, but which are the ones that we should actually pay attention to? Which are the ones that are within the normal range, and actually are we seeing any considerable changes within the patterns? And we could see that from April, there was a bit of a step change. It started to reduce. Aprils always make me suspicious in local government, because you think, oh, new financial year, what policy have you changed? And so we can start to have a conversation about actually what was implemented at that time that made a difference, because here we can see there is a clear, potentially statistically significant difference as well. And then the ability to start splitting that by the priority need reason. And what this means is that the reason that kind of bump people up the priority list in terms of receiving any sort of support. So these top 3 categories here show us that the applicants have got dependent children, and so we can start to see the patterns in terms of, okay, well, overall, I can see a downward trend. Are we experiencing the same trend for those that have dependent children? What about those that have mental illness, for example? And straight away, very, very simple view of the data, starting to highlight, actually, do we have seasonality relating to pregnancy and homelessness? You know, is that a question that anybody's ever asked before? And how can we use this analysis just to help people connect to the data and start posing further questions? We also started to look at how we can use the data to help people understand that process in a bit more detail and really understand where there might be flaws or things done differently that they perhaps didn't realise. We quite often find there's a disconnect between what people think is happening at a senior level versus actually what's happening day to day. This example especially, there was 3 stages to the initial application process, so they were meant to be assessed in regards to stage 1, 2 and 3. What it turns out was they were doing all 3 at once and going, right, you tick box 1, we're going to assume you also tick 2 and 3, and we'll just move you on to the next stage. So very quickly we started to have a conversation about, should we review the process that's going on here and actually divert people away at a sooner stage rather than actually having all of that demand on our to-do list at the more important part of the process. And then the last page here, a lot of people don't like to see this when we first do our analytics, but it's really, really important, is we always produce a data quality page as part of our reports, and we always attach it to the report as well. You're not going to ignore it, it's not separate. Not only is it in the app, it's attached to your main report as well, and I'm going to show it you, and you're going to admit to what's in there. But more importantly, the data quality here is about tracking change. So the reason we produce our data quality reports in the way that we do is that it actually enables people to go away and make a difference. So those that have been given the responsibility as data stewards to actually make improvements to the data, they can see what's the actual issue within the data, how is that changing over time, and actually just give me a list that I can go away and action, and then we can see if that's improving or worsening as a result of the activity as well. The reason we include it within the report pages is so that you've got that context as well, and actually it starts to debunk a few myths. So as I said previously, the director was telling us we've got terrible data quality within the system. Actually, it's not that bad at all. You've got some quite bad processes. So what you were doing is once a month inputting a stack of forms that nobody had done every day. So you were getting lags in the data that was coming through. It wasn't so much that there was terrible data quality, but actually you didn't really know what it was. And I like to think of it as known quality as opposed to perfect quality. You're never going to get 100% quality within your data, but actually if we know what it is, we can make better decisions about what we do with it. And just this simple set of reports really started to help the service area get more confidence in their data, but also be able to articulate what was going on in their service. And to me, that's really important. Can you describe who uses your service, where the demand's coming from, how that's changing over time, and who is being impacted? So the next stage of that process, and just very quickly, was about the decisions made about those applications. So as I said earlier, we know some people fill forms in and take quite a long time to fill them in. Others fill them in on the day and want action straight away. Once that form has been completed, somebody has to make a decision about that case. So based on all the criteria, do you qualify for any support from the local authority? And again, all of these were produced by different data analysts previously, all in slightly differently formatted spreadsheets. Nobody could really look across them and say, what's the flow of demand throughout the service area? And I had a really interesting discussion with somebody from the procurement team who said, well, people are coming to me saying, you've got to find us 2 3-bedroom houses next week because I've got these people that need housing. And he'd say, well, how long have you known about them? And why are you telling me now? Why are you just constantly presenting me with demand rather than helping me to understand the flow and what I need to be prepared for in the future? So from a very, very basic point of view, not basic as in it's adding that insight, but there's nothing particularly advanced here in terms of the analytics. We just started to look at how many acceptances were made, so how many applications were accepted where the council had to offer some sort of support. What are those averages? So what's the average acceptances per week over the last 12 weeks? How many did we have in the last 7 days? Can we make some sort of rough assessment at this stage that we might expect next week there to be around that value? So we might next week expect to be between 17 and 21. More information, more insight than they'd ever had previously. But more importantly, starting then to link that by the number in the household. So how many 2-person households might we expect to see? How many 1-beds, for example? How many large families. And straight away, the supply side of the organisation could start to think about the flow and actually what might we need to start planning better for in the future. Are we seeing an influx of people that are large-sized families, or actually I've just been offered the opportunity to buy 21-bed bedsits. Should I take up that opportunity? So really adding some layers of value just by having that conversation going, demand and supply, surely you talk to each other. No. And actually, how can the data start to branch those conversations with a bit more depth? So moving on from the descriptive and diagnostic analytics, we then started to take it to a slightly higher level and say, okay, so how can we start to use predictive analytics to move this forward even more? And this is quite a simple example of some predictive analytics. What we really encourage our customers that we work with to do first is don't rush into this. So quite often we're introduced to talk to people about predictive analytics. We want to do predictive analytics. Go, great, okay, well, what analytics do you do now? Well, we've got reporting on numbers and we kind of know what we want to predict. It's like, do you really know what you want to predict? You could predict 1,001 different things and you could be going completely down a rabbit hole. The work that we did very much was about, okay, understand your cohort, understand where the demand's coming from, and use that to refine the question you want to ask of the predictive analytics. So this here is actually looking at what's the likelihood of an application coming in on day one of actually needing somewhere to live next week. So this is saying at that very first stage of the process, and actually there's a number of reports that I haven't got time to go into detail today that say what's the timeliness of each of those stages. So actually it can take over a year to go from very first inquiry right to somebody getting some housing support. But on day one, based on the basic criteria within that application, how likely is somebody to either be accepted or not accepted when it comes to the council discharging their duty to support them. So this is just using Azure machine learning. It's using an API then linked to Power BI, and it actually predicts the outcomes of those applications. So from the 99 that were received, 84% were predicted to be accepted. 84 predicted to be accepted, 15 declined. And this is using a model that actually is learning as it goes. So the more that would come through this, the more refined those outputs will be. So this is quite a small data set in this example. But over time, this is learning, getting smarter, and actually will get more clarity of the outcomes.
What are the 21%?
So this is the probability of that 84. So this is the number that will improve over time. So if we were to get 1,000 applications within this 2,000, 3,000, we'd expect that number to increase. So this is saying with a probability of 21%, those 84 will be accepted. Those 84 applications have a probability of 21% of being accepted. So this is one where small numbers gives you really wide confidence intervals, and so we just want to reduce that over time. So the higher that number will be, the better the output will be over time. So it's a bit of a proof of concept really in terms of predictive analytics at this phase, but it was helping people to recognise that actually if they start to use their data more effectively, if we can improve that data quality within the system, then we can start to use this to think not necessarily about automatically making a decision about people, but actually how do we construct our teams that deal with these individuals? So do we put more people on dealing with complex cases and fewer on those that are more likely to be declined, for example? So in terms of the first principle about understanding your subject matter, it's really about defining the purpose of those analytics. And the question that I always pose to people is, don't tell me what you want to see, tell me what you want to know. So I'm not going to come in here and say, what graphs do you want to see on your charts, or what report pages do you want producing? I walk through the door and I have a conversation. First of all, tell me about your priorities, tell me about your area, tell me the burning questions that keep you awake at night. And actually, what are the answers that you really need? What would you like to understand in more detail? And then let's use our understanding of your service area and of the data to help form that view that we know can take you through that journey. However, from that stage, it's really important that we carefully plan those analytics across each report page because it can creep very, very quickly. My brain kind of goes off in 1,000 different directions as soon as I have a conversation with somebody. I think, oh, it's great, I could do this, 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 and this. But actually, it's taking them step at a time. It's really important that we deliver those descriptive analytics. What have you got? Understand your service area, then start to apply the added value in terms of why and when and how, and then we can move more into that predictive space. And it is really about telling a story, so taking people through an understanding of their service area that they perhaps didn't even know existed at all. My second principle is about taking it to the next level, but not showing off. I have to rein myself in a little bit on this one sometimes. So I like to think of my style with Power BI is really about simplicity, but with a depth. I like to produce reports that on the surface look quite simple, but actually it's about making sure that the message is communicated on each page. There's a huge amount of functionality within Power BI now that is very, very tempting just to use for the sake of it. You know, I'm guilty, I've got a fish tank. I think everybody's got a fish tank, but that's for my own private use. But it's really about ensuring that we use those features for a reason. You know, custom visuals, for example, I like to think, what am I trying to do with this data? Then I'll go and look for the visual. It's all too a bit tempting to browse through them and think, oh, where can I use this? You know, there's a lot out there. But there's some subtle ways that you can really start to introduce that depth of your analysis with Power BI. I really like things like shading by different values, things like your drill throughs. Ultimately, what we've learned over the last few years is that sustainability is really key with a tool like this. So if you want to really shift people away from the old ways of using data to a more modern way of actually discovering the patterns within the data for themselves, it's really important that it's sustainable. A quick flash in the pan of something that looks great on the surface, but actually they can't really interact with it or don't quite know what it's telling them, is been and gone. And some of our usage metrics from the early days would show that. You know, you'd do something you think would look quite great, but actually people looked at it once or twice, they showed it to other people, and then it just massively dropped off after that. What we're looking for is consistency within those usage metrics. Local government, you find peaks once a month, which is quite common. But if those peaks are still there, then I'm quite happy. So it's really about how can we introduce layers of depth within that analysis, but make sure it's still very usable. And how can you ensure that it aligns to different audience requirements as well? So we always think of it in terms of what's that strategic view that the leaders of the organisation need to see, but then what's the operational view that sits within it as well? So operationally, it's the same data from the same sources, but it's just presented in different ways depending on the requirements. So in terms of this key principle, it's very much about keeping it simple, start simple as well. So it's always very iterative, the way that we develop the analytics. Like I say, that first page gave us an hour's conversation. So keep it simple, because sometimes you can overlook it. As an analyst, you think it's not enough, there's not quite enough there. But it's amazing actually how much further it can take somebody on their understanding of their area just through some very simple analytics that they've not seen in that way before. I've already said don't use visuals for the sake of it. Sometimes I throw it all out there and pare it back, test it on one of your colleagues. But really it's about adding that value and depth to the analysis as well, and ensuring that if somebody's got a question, they know they can go back and find it within that report rather than having to keep coming back to you time and time again. The fourth bullet point, show the data. My boss in the audience is a big advocate of analysing Excel, as we all are now within the organisation, but it's never going to go away. People want to see their data. So if you've got that great aggregated view of your analytics, you're always going to want to drill down. People are always going to want to know, okay, well, you're saying there's 50 there, but who are those 50? What are those 50? Preempt some of that, obviously, depending on the ability to see down to that level. But very much make use of things like drill throughs, analyse in Excel. I try and prevent people from using export as much as possible. Don't want to create silos of data. But sometimes it isn't possible to use the See Records feature. If you've got some complex DAX within your data models, it's not always an opportunity to use that. So think of more creative ways that you can use some of those drill throughs, and analyse in Excel actually offers real value to a lot of our customers that we work with. And the last point, this is where I'm a little bit OCD about my reports. Polish up the formatting. One of the areas that people think I'm being really frustrating when I review their work is where I go, your visuals on the left aren't 10 points from the x-axis. Well, actually, it makes a big difference. If you've got things that are a little bit all over the place, people lose confidence in what they're looking at. And what I learned many years ago is consistency is really, really key. So if you use one colour for one category, use it throughout your reports. If you always have your header titles, 115 from the top, do it all the time. And actually it does really, really make a difference, because people look at that and they go, oh, there's something of quality here that makes a difference. And your eye isn't jumping all over the place trying to find what you're looking for. Instead, you can actually focus on what the insights are showing you. So let me just flick to... So in terms of the sort of the depth of the analysis, again, this on the surface is quite a simple report. And this is one of my absolute favourites, because nobody said it's not there. You're very polite. You're going to wonder what it is now because I said it was on my favourite. Here we go. So, spend quite a lot of time in Wales at the moment. Wales is big business when it comes to recognising how they can start to use their data. And delayed transfers of care is a big hot topic as well. So what this means is individuals that have been admitted to hospital that need some support before they can go back home, and they've been waiting in hospital for an assessment from social care, or they're looking to move into a care home, for example. People are staying in hospital far too long. And from a public sector point of view, that can be really quite damaging. So we know that the longer you stay in hospital, the more likely you are not to leave, the more likely you are to need long-term support, which can be very, very expensive. What we want to encourage is independence in your own home for as long as possible. And there are multiple reasons why you can be delayed leaving hospital. It could be because of the NHS processes, but it could also be because of the local government, the local council processes as well. And this report here really gets people talking because the data that's available to local councils to understand this is really, really limited. So the NHS release numbers on a monthly basis. It's put on the NHS digital website in CSV files. Thomas and Prathy mentioned earlier, it can be CSV, Excel, just because you want to make sure that you're checking, and then it's CSV again. And there's always loads of pivots within there and headers and footers and all that sort of stuff. So we quite often find that analysts within local government are spending a lot of time just downloading that data, trying to draw out the minimal insight you can from 3 or 4 columns. The NHS have a lot more data on this that they're quite guarded about releasing. But actually, if we can just automate those processes, so this is very, very simply, I've got those CSV files in our data lake, connect to it, it just refreshes once a month. This is the Wales version actually, so this is connected to the Stats Wales website. They've got an awesome API, no keys or anything, it's brilliant. So this is just refreshed, I refreshed this last night actually, on a monthly schedule. So again, it's quite limited in terms of the columns of data that are in there, but this really gets people talking about, well, actually, I didn't know that number, and I spend so much time just pulling the spreadsheets off that it takes me 2-3 months before my director looks at it, and then he asks, well, why has it gone up? And then I have to go back and find out, and then it's changed again, and you're having a very different conversation. Whereas this really helps us to understand where those key issues are. And one of the key things that I really like to make use of as much as possible is the analyse and explain the increase and explain the decrease. So this is very much looking at the InBill ML tools within Power BI. And this is one where it really helps to drive those conversations around what the data is showing as well. So here we can see there's a 30% increase in delayed transfers of care between those 2 periods, and community care arrangements and waiting for care home availability are the 2 biggest reasons that contributed towards that increase. It's one of those where, as an analyst, you like to think you've covered all your bases when you're looking at where all the different patterns are within the data, but the introduction of some of these tools within Power BI itself just allows you to go, well, okay, as an end user, I'm providing you with an analytical view of the data, but you can start to explore some of that for yourself as well, because it can change from month on month. One month it might be to do with the actual reason for the increase, the reason for delay, sorry. Others it might be because there's been an increase particular age groups as well. So very quickly we can start to say, well, what's the key thing that we need to start focusing on this month? And by setting up your data model in a way that allows you to do this, it really, really is very powerful. If you're connecting to structured data in a SQL database, for example, or directly to a line of business system, there's a good chance you'll get lots of gobbledygook in here, but you can combat that within your data model as well by using synonyms, by making sure you don't bring in the columns that you don't need to use. Make sure it's really, really focused on your analytics, and actually you'll get real value out of this. So if you haven't tried this previously, I recommend that you go away and have a look at it. There's also a new one that was introduced. I was literally doing a demo one day and I right-clicked on a graph and I was like, that wasn't there before. But actually on horizontal bar charts, there's a feature now where you can actually look where there's differences in distributions as well. So see where this distribution is different, and it's using the same back-end technology, and it really does make, it's quite impactful when you're looking at where patterns are different within the data. But one of the reasons that this offers depth for those customers that we're talking to and the local authorities within Wales is because they love to compare themselves with each other. Everybody's in a bit of competition with, oh, okay, well, click on Cardiff, how are they doing compared to us? Or what's Bridgend like compared with Carmarthenshire? And the ability to start looking at this in a more, I always think of this as quite an infographic style view of the data. I don't really like to do things that are too picturesque in this way, but actually this really draws people's attention to it. And just some very simple custom visuals in here makes people sit up and look at something that they talk about all the time. Everybody groans when you talk about delayed transfers of care, when it's a priority for us as well, but we're just tracking the numbers month on month. Whereas here you can start to have a more focused view and actually understand, well, okay, how can we very quickly say, let's just select these 4 or 5 local authorities and look at that combined view of all of those. And actually the ability to dynamically make those selections makes people very, very aware of the extent to which you can start to interact with it as an end user. I think there's something about bringing people along the journey as well. You can never drop something on them that is all singing or dancing and expect them to get everything out of it straight away. So by starting simple but adding some things that they don't know in there. There was a boss I had a few years ago who was not one of the most inspirational bosses I've had in my life, but she said something to me about 6 months into her joining the team, and she said, we're an insight function. If we're not telling people something new every time we deliver some insights, then actually are we doing our job effectively? And so I always strive to ensure that we pull things out that people perhaps didn't recognise was even there, and quite often that's just in ways of cutting the data in a different way that helps you to appreciate patterns that people perhaps weren't aware of, but are obviously pertinent to what they're trying to do as well. Don't just throw something in that has no relevance at all. Cool. This example is on the data stories gallery as well, if anybody wants to have a bit of a play with it after the event. So, in terms of some of the layers of the analytics as well, this is a relatively recent piece of work that we've just been looking at in a bit of detail. And this, again, it's about adult social care. Again, it's quite a straightforward, descriptive piece of analytics in terms of understand your service area, so how many clients are we working with, what's that split by team, what's that by level of need, for example. So here we've got more individuals that need higher levels of need and those that have lower levels of need. Ultimately, what we've done with this data is to start to understand in a little bit more detail what's the profile of those individuals that we're working with. It's quite refreshing to present to a room full of people that know Power BI, and I don't have to apologise at the speed at which the Esri map is rendering. But they have massively improved that, actually. We were just talking about that on the way up here. I know the last release has made huge improvements. And I've only very recently discovered that we can create the boundary maps in Esri as well. But in terms of the profiling of those individuals, so what's the type of support they're receiving, what's that distribution by age and gender, how does that compare for the different levels of need and the geographical distribution. The reason we started to look at this profile information in a bit more detail was, okay, well, we know that we're working with individuals within the community. These are likely to be those that have had some sort of transfer from hospital. So we're giving them a package of short-term support because we want to make sure they can stay in their homes for longer. But actually, how do we monitor them to make sure that we're aware of their risk of need in the future? So this is helping us to understand, well, okay, we can see there's increases in the over the age of 80, more likely to have females than males within this cohort, which is understandable because females live longer. But also we can see that there's quite high levels of need, and there's also quite big disparate geographical variations here as well. There's quite a lot of national research about this that talks about the characteristics that make somebody at risk of need in the future as well. So things like living in areas of deprivation, social isolation, not having family nearby. So what we started to look at was actually how can we use all of that data to create a very simple view that helps people start to think about how they can target who they're working with in more detail. So this analysis here, it results in a single page, but this is looking at how can we start to categorise individuals. So who are those that are over the age of 85, they're currently living in their own home, they're receiving some sort of care package from the local council, their initial level of need was assessed as being 6 or above, so out of 10. And they also live in a deprived area as well, so using the indices of multiple deprivation data that's published, how can we bring all that together to categorise individuals into those 3 bandings? And I'm always careful to keep those quite broad as well, because I'm not here to say you need to go and speak to this person tomorrow. What I see our roles as analysts is to say, how can you prioritise this list? We've got 3,000 individuals within this cohort. Actually, what's that top proportion that you perhaps need to have a more focused view on? So here we can see we end up with 129 or 6% that fit within that high risk group. So we're saying they are at high risk of receiving some more intensive level of need in the future. And actually, there's something, I don't know if you're aware of it, it's called excess winter deaths, so it sounds a bit morbid. But every year, the NHS monitor how many individuals die over the winter period that actually, if those temperatures hadn't have dropped within that time, probably wouldn't have died within that time period. And it's things to do with respiratory, circulatory diseases, usually older people that can't afford to heat their homes or don't move around very much, or don't go to the doctor when they're unwell, and then it ends up turning into something more serious as well. So this here is helping us to understand who are those individuals at risk that actually we potentially need to do something a bit more intensive to support them. This is then linking to the ability to start prioritising who we visit. So part of the work that we do is about, I talked earlier about people recording things in spreadsheets. We're doing some pilot work with a couple of local authorities to start using Power Apps to capture visit data. So when a social worker arrives at a property, they can say, I've arrived. It logs their location details. They can also then make notes, take photographs, and it gets fed back in, and we can analyse that alongside the social care data. What it also enables us to do then is say, well, out of these individuals that we think are high risk, what other monitoring do we need to put in place? So there's an awful lot of talk about IoT and smart homes and sensors. We're saying don't put smart sensors in everybody's home, put sensors in the homes of the people you think are at risk, and we can use that data to actually monitor the impact that it's having as well. So sensors and IoT are great, but actually it's about generating data. It's just a new way of generating data that doesn't yet exist. Where does it have impact actually when we analyse it alongside other data sets as well? So this here is telling us for that particular group of individuals, what's their average household temperature, how has that varied over time, and then we can start to look at creating some triggers associated with that says, send their social care worker an alert if that drops below a particular period, but not if it just drops below 12, if it drops below a particular value over a significant amount of time, for example. So bringing it back in with the analytics, really starting to add some value. So this is dummy data, by the way, so don't be shocked that they're living in 12 degrees temperatures. It's dummy data for now. But this is very much about going, okay, there's a huge amount of different data that's brought into this. We've got the social care data, we've got the discharges from hospital, we've got sensor data from their homes, we've got the Power Apps collecting notes and photographs of the conditions. Actually, let's just bring this into one view that helps us monitor the impact on those individuals, and then can we start to use that to prioritise our services. A lot of local authorities commission out services for social care as well. So this is enabling us to understand, are we commissioning the right services? Are we spending our money in the most appropriate places as well? So moving on to principle number 3. And this is about thinking like the business. So it might sound, I've renamed this slide about 7 times. But this is about making sure you're connecting with how people use it. So first of all, I talked about understanding the service area or the organisation that you're supporting. This is very much about thinking about how they're actually going to use and apply it. So we don't do this for fun, I'm sure, well, we do a little bit. We don't predominantly use Power BI for fun. It's actually about helping people to get the data that they need to make important decisions, translating it into insight, importantly. But actually, how can we ensure that it's done in the way that actually genuinely makes a difference? And I think the question, so who uses Power BI themselves within their own organisation or to manage their own workload? I think there's a fundamental shift for us as an organisation probably about 2 years ago when we just started using it for everything within our own business. So we are Power BI specialists and we work with our customers to implement Power BI solutions for them. But we started to generate a lot of business as we grew as well, a lot of data as a business as we grew. And naturally, we just started to put Power BI over the top of it. So we use Power BI for monitoring our website, we use it to monitor all of our projects, we use it to understand how much income we're generating, we use it to understand sickness rates, holidays, huge amounts of data that we as an organisation generate. And it really started to get our consultants and our analysts thinking slightly differently about, oh, okay, I actually interact with that now. I get what people say when they go, I don't quite understand how to use this feature, or I just want to drill down and I want to see this in a different level of detail. It kind of gets you over your ego a little bit when you're creating Power BI visualizations, and helps you to realise if you've got somebody that you're working with to develop these, they give you honest feedback. If it's a report, I produced all of these for me and for the other senior management team, and actually when they're going, well, no, because I'm using it for this purpose, you get that very honest feedback, and it does make a huge difference. The last report here, which I'll bring up if we've got time, is actually about accessing, monitoring access to our data repository as well. So we use Azure Data Lake predominantly as our centralized data store. And one of the things that people assume about data lakes is they're very unstructured and they're very unsecured. It's a bit of a free-for-all. You can chuck anything in it and anybody can get access to all of it. People don't always believe us when we go, no, actually it's the complete opposite. Nobody can get access to anything unless you explicitly define it on their behalf. And so we've created some monitoring reports that use the logs that are generated in Azure, and it actually shows just how many interactions there have been within that data lake environment, total number of operations, what the output of those were, who has tried to open a file but can't get in it, how frequently are people accessing it, and it just really starts to produce that visibility over what's there and give people a bit more confidence in how they can use these tools to monitor their own business as well. So, I've lost my mouse, there it is. So here we go. So quite a nice simple report that allows us to look at, well, what was the activity yesterday, in the last 7 days, over the last 28 days. This is our, like I say, it's our internal data lake that we use for all our proof of concepts and demos and all that sort of stuff, so it can be quite variable who's looking at what. Usually I'm hitting it quite hard a few times a month, but it can vary on a frequent basis. But it tells us the operation types, who the users are as well. And then on here as well, I've got some drill throughs where I can select my own username and I can actually see what are all those interactions, what are the files that I've tried to open, were they successful, could I get at it, am I browsing for data that I don't have permissions to use. Really, really effective in terms of actually just monitoring what's going on within your own data platform as well. So just to finish off in terms of an example, I just wanted to show you a dashboard because we've looked at a lot of reports up until now. And in terms of thinking like your business, this is an example that I've been working on for a couple of months in terms of performance management. So we quite often talk to people about, oh, can Power BI do performance management? Can it do management information reporting? Can it do strategic analytics? Well, yeah, it can do whatever you want it to because it's a presentation tool and it's a set of tools, and actually it's about how you as an analyst apply it. And so I wanted to create a dashboard that really had a focus on exception reporting. So I mentioned earlier that people are really bombarded with huge amounts of information. Director of Children's Services has a huge number of responsibilities. They're quite often responsible for the most vulnerable children, potentially all of the schools within the area as well. Massive budgets, massive pressures, huge amounts of data generated. They have one of the biggest statutory requirements for collecting data, for submitting it to central government. Quite often spend a lot of time doing that and then not having time to do their own analytics locally as well. So the way that we tend to break it down is to go, well, let's look at all your service areas. Let's ensure you've got good descriptive and diagnostic analytics across looked after children, children in need, child protection plans, youth offending, substance misuse. Let's show it to you in a nice, clear way that you can understand what's going on. But then let's bring that up a level so you can really focus on what matters as well. So this is an example of one of the performance reports that we've been producing and demonstrating to individuals to help them recognise, yeah, it does performance management, but you have to know what you want to performance manage as well and let the data lead you there. But in terms of thinking like the business and thinking about actually how do I want to interact with my content, as an end user, there's a very good chance I've got a huge array of different apps, more and more. I love the feature where you can say, publish this on their behalf, because I'm like, yeah, you're going to see this app. I'm not going to make you go and fetch it. I'm going to put it in your app menu. But actually, how do I know which are the key things that I should be focusing on a regular basis? And we use alerts quite a lot when we're using performance management dashboards in particular. So in this example, we've got front door referrals. So this is where children's services are initially contacted. It might be the police, a teacher that's making a referral about a potential safeguarding issue. And there's a journey that those children go through then to either require some sort of support or they're long-term taken into the care of the local authority. And this is, interestingly, quite a new area for a lot of local authorities. So they very much focus on statutory services. Who are those children we must support at the very high level of need? But actually understanding who's being referred and those initial contacts is data that often wasn't collected on a routine basis. So this can help us to understand where those initial bottlenecks are and blockages within the system. So here we have what percentage of contacts go on to become a referral, how many of those referrals are then seen by a social worker, and then we can set alerts up on here as well. So we always encourage people to set their own alerts. We don't like, so people always ask me, can I set alerts for other people? Actually, I'm not sure you should do that. I quite like that it's on a very bespoke basis. So I like the fact you can subscribe other people. You will look at my report once it's refreshed. And we always say to managers and directors, actually, yeah, I want you to subscribe your team because I want them to know it's come from you and they should be looking at this report when it's refreshed. But alerts, I think, can be quite personal. And what I like to do is encourage people to sit and go through this. So when we first complete a piece of work, we don't just chuck it over the line. They go, here's a hyperlink, off you go with your report. Actually, I'm going to sit down with you and I'm going to talk it through. And I'm going to talk to you about what does this mean for you. So when we look at the contacts that go on to become referrals, the service might have a target of 70%, but you in your role, what actually do you want to know about? Where should we set that threshold? I'm not going to have a blanket for everybody. Actually, the director, you might want to know when it goes above 50. As a service head, I want to know when it's 80. So it's actually about encouraging people to think about this. And I've found that actually sitting down with people and setting these alerts for them or with them, alongside them, gives them a little bit more, helps them to relate to it a bit more as well. They remember that experience, and actually when it pings then on their phone or they get that email, they remember actually why that matters and why that was a conversation that triggered them implementing the alert in the first place. We also make use of performance commentary as well. So a lot of councils have quite traditional performance management arrangements where they spend a lot of time pulling together packs of performance information. I think it's probably quite common across a lot of organisations, really. And a lot of that is about getting comments from people. So sending an email going, this has gone up by 20. Can you give me a reason? Because I need to put an excuse in the report because the director's going to ask me. Here we're using, so this example actually is connecting to SharePoint forms. So people just go onto SharePoint, enter their commentary, and then it's reading that directly into the report. Starting to move more towards using Power Apps for that sort of thing, a bit more flexible. But yeah, again, it's that dynamic link, being able to bring in those comments on the page. And then more recently, we've started to use the dynamic commenting on here as well. So having that conversation about the data in real time. We found that organisations that are using Teams more and more now love this sort of thing. They kind of get up to speed with this a bit quicker as well. We use Teams quite predominantly within our own organisation, so it's a bit of a natural next step, really. But the fact that you can tag people in it, you can get instant responses to that, you can be having a conversation about this with somebody and you go, actually, I'm not quite sure why there's been that change. I'm just going to comment and add somebody in there and just bring them into that conversation. And what we found is historically, people have tried to fit new tools like Power BI into their old processes and their old ways of working. And this has encouraged a conversation about, okay, you did that in that way because they were the tools that you had at the time. It's not to say they were particularly wrong ways of doing things, but do you really want to wait a month to have a conversation about it again? Whereas here we can actually say, well, this is a real live problem here and now. Let's talk about it and start to include the right people in it at the right time. So in terms of involving the business as well, again, this is quite a nice, simple, but again, consistent with all the other sort of reports that we produce. And this was looking at child protection plans. And it was really, really important to the individuals we were talking at the time. She said, I absolutely need to see the numbers on those graphs. I need to know how many are closed and opened. And I need to be able to click on that 18 and actually see who those 18 people were. Oh, I've clicked on the wrong thing, sorry. Blame the mouse pad. So here we had to build the model in a slightly different way to enable us to be able to show those records within the data. This was such a huge step forward in terms of being able to view trends over time, but actually understand who those cohorts are. And the fact that you've got an individual that is quite data savvy in how she wants to use the information for her service, the fact that you can go, well, actually, let's just look at those individuals that have neglect as an issue, that have had more than one CP plan. Well, actually, who are those two individuals? And these quite often are people who are used to filtering big spreadsheets of data, and just being able to sit with them and set it up with them. They use this every day. You look at the usage metrics, this is a report she's opening and exploring every single day because it's very, very tailored to her individual needs. And surprise, surprise, everybody else we talked about child protection wants exactly the same thing. So it's one of those that we can then start to apply to wider groups of individuals as well. So, that my cue that I've... No, it's just that screen, apologies. So in terms of thinking like the business, it's about, think about how you would use Power BI yourself as well. One of our holiday reports, for example, so we use Power Apps to record when we want to take time off through work. I've got a Power BI dashboard that records all the holidays, so when we're planning our projects, we know who's available when. But then we also see that embedded within Power Apps. So as an individual, when I'm logging my holiday, I can also see how many days I've got left. All of them, because I don't take holidays, obviously. But it's just that interaction allows me to think about how would other people start to use this data in this way, and how can you start to make just very little subtle changes that can make something quite powerful to a wider group of individuals. Also think about how you're guiding the end user through as well. Simple things sometimes, just like what you call your report page or what you put in the header, or even just, I say to our team all the time, just put text box on there that says, right, click here to drill through. It doesn't, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of the time to develop, but all of a sudden you'll find people start to use it more and more. And over time you can start to take some of those things away. But I think if you genuinely want to make people recognise the value of what's there, don't be afraid to put some little signposts in. Things like bookmarks and buttons, my new best friend, my worst enemy at sometimes as well, and how they can trip you up. But in terms of being able to actually go, no, just literally click here and it will take you to what you need to see. It makes a huge difference in terms of end user experience. Showing you data quality as well, I covered that in point 2, I was meant to save it for point 3. This is very much about thinking, okay, I'm looking at this data, but I'm unsure whether I should trust it or not. And just having that honest conversation with them early on about what do you think about your data quality? Is this something that you're aware of? Do we need to help you understand it in more detail? But actually, how can I get you to recognise the quality that exists within your data, what you can do about it moving forward, but then also how you can use that understanding to have more confidence in what you're seeing within the analytics. And then finally on this point, it is about handing it over quite carefully. Don't expect instant take-up. Quite often when you invest a lot of time producing analytics in this way, it can be a bit disheartening that people aren't using it quite how you would expect them to. But actually, it really is a journey, and you've got to spend a lot of your own time just helping people to recognise what's there and what you've done. We always do very agile development in terms of getting the business involved throughout the development process. So we'll have a kick-off session to say, what do you need to know, what are the questions that you need answering, and then every week we'll sit down with them and talk through what we've done already, help them to recognise how it's coming together. They get the opportunity to influence how it's starting to look, but they also start to bond with their own product a little bit more as well. And you have to recognise that that is a long-term journey to support people. But the more focused and the more analytically focused your Power BI reports are, the less and less you have to do that over time, because it's less of a where do I go and where do I look? That black and orange report at the beginning where I don't know how I'm supposed to use this. Actually keeping something simple but with real depth within it will mean that you'll get better take-up from my personal experience anyway. So in terms of a bit of a recap, very much about making sure you take the time to understand what you're doing the work on. We've done quite a lot of work on finance analytics in the last couple of years, and I've had to watch a huge number of YouTube videos on invoices and expenditure and all that sort of stuff, but suddenly it all just starts to click together when you spend a bit of time starting to understand who you're doing it for and how they're going to use it. Simplicity with depth is absolutely my mantra when it comes to delivering the analytics as well. So start simple, but add those layers of depth within your analysis. And then ultimately, think about actually how your business users are going to interact with this and engage with it. If they're only ever going to use it on apps and mobile devices, make sure you're kind of setting it up in the right way as well. The report that we use for our Google Analytics, we get alerts to say when certain organisations have hit our web page, and usually it's when you're out and about and you want to click through it on your phone, and it's no good if it's not quite set up in the right way. But my final point is really about challenging yourself as you do your development and do your analytics as well. Do you genuinely believe it's making a difference? Are people getting the value out of what you know it's capable of? And are you speaking to people about how they're using it? What you might think is right and pertinent at the time isn't always appropriate for how the audience is using it. So go and have that conversation and be open to individuals when they perhaps have different ideas about how they want to see things. That's all from me. Thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right, I will get this one and then
Yeah, thanks very much. you mentioned, and there may be the same thing, you mentioned Azure machine learning, and then on the following slide you had reasons for, you had an analysis which said the delays due to community care assessment. I was intrigued as how the system can give you the reason for something.
How the Power BI report,
Yeah.
do you mean, or do
Is
you want me to go
there some kind of model in the data?
There is a model in the data, but I think what we're actually referring to is the ML that's built within Power BI itself. So within this example here, so if I right-click and select, oh, thank you. Way back, there we go. Here we go, in this example. So, so this is a simple trend line, simply within Power BI. If I go on to analyze and explain the increase, this feature is actually built into the Power BI service. So it's looking across all the different columns of data within my existing data model. So here where it's looking at community care arrangements, accounting for the majority of the increase, it's actually looking at that column that's got the reason for delay within there, and it's saying, are any of those categories within that data contributing towards that change? So
How does it know that?
well, it's through, so do you remember Quick Insights within the Power BI service? So Quick Insights actually looks across all of the columns of data. So just like you as an analyst would cut and slice. So if you had a big flat file of data and you put it in a pivot table and you looked at all the permutations of that data, so how many delays in this particular time period for this category, for every single combination, that's what the machine learning algorithm is doing. It's looking at all the different permutations and picking out anything it thinks is of significance within that data. And it's learning all the time as well. So if you agree that, yes, that is something of value, you can tick the thumbs up, and it's adding that into the model to refine it for future, for the future model.
And you find it, you believe what it says?
I verified what it says. So in this example, if I was to go back into the data model and look at this in this way, yeah, that's what's in the data. You quite often get some erroneous things in there as well that are just very, very obvious. Like it'll say day number correlates with day name. You're like, well, yes, I'd expect it to. I'm quite glad of that. But then they're not always going to be of relevance to your analysis. Yes, it is.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Considering you do a lot of public sector work, whereas you kind of said the data is inconsistent, it is sometimes in Excel, and how do you ensure that your Power BI reports are refreshed after you leave if the data's not going to come in necessarily the same format, or, yeah.
So the way we work with our customers and the organisations is actually looking at their whole strategy around data. So we never go in anywhere and just create Power BI reports for them, because that is a bit dangerous and it can be a little bit like smoke and mirrors. So what we do is we work with organisations to understand where does all that data come from. So the first thing we do is say, what do you need to know? What are the questions you need answering? What are the analytics you need? And therefore, what's the data that supports those, producing those analytics? It could be spreadsheets, it could be databases, it could be all over the place. And then the longer term data strategy is ensuring that data is in a position that you can automate analytics on top of it. So if it is a spreadsheet, it might be that we identify somebody whose responsibility it is to take ownership of that. We talk about creating data management functions that understand where does your data come from, do you appreciate the quality, do you appreciate the structure, but a lot of the time it's about tackling the problem at root cause. There's lots of things you can do. So when I first started using Power BI, I used to get really excited that I could use Power Query to unpivot tables, get rid of footnotes, get rid of all the rubbish that you get in ONS tables that are released. But you think, yeah, actually all it takes is one person, 1 month to do something differently. And if you've not built your data model in the right way, if you've said exclude columns rather than keep columns or vice versa, then you can have some issues with that. So ultimately it's about understanding the estate of what you're working with long term and looking at the suitability of that as well. So this example where I talk about the delayed transfers of care, there's one London borough we work with where we're saying ignore the open source data, actually get a better relationship with the NHS trust in your area and get a direct connection to the information that they've previously sent you once a month on a spreadsheet. How can we get better ways of sharing data from source rather than always getting it second, third hand, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of work to understand actually what's there that contributes to all of this. But yeah, we can never just stuff something on top and hope for the best and then walk away. It's not in our interest for it to fail after the first month it falls down. So.
Thank you.
Hi. Just a quick question about I think it was the temperature graph. How did you get that icon?
Oh, that's a custom visual. Let me go back. I first used that a couple of years ago when we did some work around prices of fuel. It's this one, wasn't it? Yeah, so this is just a custom visual off the marketplace. It's one of those that you have to faff with a little bit, because on the surface it looks like you can't change the colour, but you have to adjust the legend and then turn the legend off. Let me just see if I can edit this and find out what it's called. Let me have a look what it's called, and I'll pick up with you afterwards if that's all right. But yeah, it's just on the marketplace, that one, custom visual.
And the infograph on, I think it was Wales, elderly. How do you get the demographics lined up with the map of Wales? How did you? Is that part of the marketplace as well?
So this here is just a shape map. So it's been in preview. This is one of my favourite visuals, but also I really wish they'd put it in general availability, and it's been in preview for a really, really long time. But this is simply where you create a topo.json file. So download files usually from the Ordnance Survey website. Use a free online converter, so quite often you download them in shapefile format, just convert it to topo.json. Or if you've got files that you've created in your local GIS system as well, I use QGIS because it's free. And yeah, you just convert it and import it in Power BI using shape map. We tend to use shape map. Field map doesn't really work for UK geographies. I find it's great if you want to report on US states. But yeah, shape map, most local authorities we work with have loads of custom boundaries as well. So things like school catchment areas, children's centre areas, all those sort of quite localised boundary areas as well. So we use shape maps a huge amount. So yeah, that's just the standard shape map.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? All right, I'm coming.
It's a party downstairs.
Hello, I got one question on this predicting decision outcomes, that slide. So you've got the confidence intervals. So you got about 21% you predicted that the cases will be accepted. So did you use some models behind, or is kind of like machine learning, or is what kind of models?
Yeah, it's both ultimately. So within Azure machine learning, the way we tend to use it is you can run multiple algorithms and models at the same time. So we'll use a number of different statistical models to test the data and understand what's been generated as a result of those. I memorised it, and I was literally talking about it before I came up here, and I've forgotten, but I will tell you afterwards. I've made a note of it. But yeah, so I think it was a 2-something decision tree for that one. But yeah, it's a model within Azure machine learning. We used so we've got a data scientist that works within our team, and it was very much a proof of concept to say, well, we know there's lots of different techniques that you can apply to all of this data. Let's apply some of those different models to understand what outcomes they generate. So actually, that is one of about 20 different reports that we've got that all have slightly different outcomes. And I think particularly within the public sector space, it's about looking at those over time to understand what sort of output they generate, because I think it's very, very dangerous to go into a public service setting and say, actually, we need to start using this to prioritise how we deliver services. Actually, you need to operate those services over a number of months alongside what those models are outputting to understand how reliable they are as well, because there's so many different external as well as internal influences on the patterns that we see within the data. So yeah, so that is a model within Azure ML, and then it's linked with an API. But yeah, it's one of about 5 or 6, I think, we introduced at the time.
Sorry, you mean the models, you actually build it up in the Excel or using some other? So how do you actually implement the models into the Power BI? So
Power BI connects to it using an API from Azure. Okay. Yep, so it's all done within Azure machine learning, okay. all in the cloud.
Cool. Thank you.
Questions? All right, okay,
cool. How much programming was involved in all of this, if any?
How do you quantify an answer to that question?
Well, the guy before showed some Python to do a simple graph, and obviously this is quite advanced. So, how much time in programming was actually involved?
So in terms of programming, I've used all the native tools within Power BI Desktop. So in all the examples I've shown you, I don't think I've used any R, I've certainly not used any Python, so there was no code in that sense. Absolutely, so one of the things that we talk to, so when we bring analysts on board with us as well, is actually recognise the power of Power Query. We've started to get really quite advanced in how we use Power Query to shape and combine our data. So everything that you can see in the user interface has already been there for a very, very long time. And if you start to understand actually how you can use M to really make your model very efficient as well, we absolutely use it to do as much work as we can in the query editor. So that actually you're doing the analytics within the model itself. So we use DAX to create our measures, but actually we use as much as we can within Power Query itself. We use R sometimes, but so far I've used R for visualizations more so than the actual bringing the data in. But we also, because most of our data is in a data repository, we sometimes use things like data lake analytics if we've got very, 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 very big data sets, which is very, very rare within local public sector. But yeah, I'm not a technical person from background, so no programming of that nature. But yeah, it's all within the desktop tool itself.
Yeah, I just wondered with your clients, you have to do a lot of training, and how do you manage that?
We do. We do. What we do is what we call a transition learning pathway. So in the past, we've done Power BI training, and I'm pretty sure from the experience in this room, you can go on a training course to learn a product, but actually how you apply that in the real world is very, very different. So the way we deliver our work on behalf of our customers is we get them involved throughout the process. So quite often, we're introduced because the organisation has a gap in terms of their skills or their capability, or usually it's just because they haven't got enough people to do this. They've got an immediate need and they just need some support to get them going. And so what we do is deliver in 3 phases. So initially we do all the foundation work, then we do a phase of enablement where we start to bring those teams up to speed. Our training is actually over 10 days end to end, so we don't just kind of throw at you, this is how you use Power BI. We actually use it on their local data and actually talk about how we understand how that data is structured, how they need to access sensitive and non-sensitive data, how best to model it as well, so that you're getting the best performance out of your own data. And throughout that training, actually, they're working with us on the ground as well, and I think that's really important, is that you actually do hands-on delivery. And all of our projects are about making our customers sustainable in how they use it. So for us, it's about enabling those internal resources. It might be that you have to bring on new resources, get new skills involved as well, but also having that hands-on support time as well. So we can do that in-depth handover, but also you've got somebody to turn to and ask a question when you just get stuck on how to use a glitchy shape map once in a while.
That's the last question. You can ask more questions downstairs.
Hi, Susie. It's actually quite a specific question. I noticed in quite a few of your dashboards, you've got like some summary text.
Yeah.
In fact, there's one actually, it's on the dashboard, housing, applications received for housing support in the top right-hand corner of that. I presume that's like dynamic text. I'm just interested how you build that. And if it is, like, how do you actually build the string? Because you've got different formats within the string. You've obviously got bold and color. And
yes.
Can you get those? I mean, is that a string and are you concatenating string and then measures? And
So I think it's called the narrative story card. Prath is nodding, so I trust your visualization knowledge. And it's very, very simple. So you write the story in the text, and then you just drop a hash where you want the dynamic variables to appear. And using variables is key to that as well, because the first one you drop in, so the fact I've got text saying October there, it formats everything as text. So if you use variables to force the formatting of your measures, it means you can mix them together. It took me about a day to figure that out the first time I did it, because this is a mix of numbers, percentages, text as well. But we find these, again, in terms of actually that handover and getting people to read and recognise and relate to what's there, it's really, really powerful. So yeah, definitely use.
yeah, absolutely agree. I think that's really valuable. I think someone can look at numbers. So it doesn't usually look at dashboards, but if they can look at something like that, it's it's great.
And
so what was it called again? What was the visual or the card called?
Sorry? Narrative story card, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
All right. If you have any more questions, you can ask downstairs while we're having our pizza. Thank you, Susie. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
if I have to sum up this session in one word, that's going to be awesome.
Oh,
And but like I really like your attention to detail, and this is probably first time I actually written some Well, I do write notes from the other
Real-time
speakers as
review.
well. Don't take it as personal speaker, especially because I know I have some speakers from the previous sessions in the audience. But like there are a few things I personally liked. I really liked your data quality page. I think that's a very, very important when it comes to any reports. As a consultant, I do create like about page, but it's not like, this is really, really good. I think I'm going to steal this, and I'm going to use it in at my client set, and I'll be telling, it's my idea.
It's all right. Copyright.
And the next thing I really like was, I don't know which report was it, but in one of your report, you were showing the slices selected, or like, there was a text saying no filters applied or something.
Oh, yes. So that was the data lake.
Yeah, that was, I mean, like, that's another thing which is very important when you're creating your reports, because you can slice and dice data in many ways. And if you actually have some text showing if there are any filters applied or things like that, that's really useful. Yeah. And the other thing I quite liked is the way you're designing your reports for the data-savvy people. And the one thing I enjoy is like, don't create visuals just for the sake of using it. I do that. I think that's the one reason I started this PUG challenge. Thing is, like, that's where I can go crazy. I can do whatever I want. But at client side, you won't get chance. But I love the way your reports look. They're really subtle, but at the same way, they're explaining a lot. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time, like, I do that, the formatting bit you mentioned. Yeah, I think that's that attention to detail. That thing makes the difference. If it's like how you're telling the story. And I love the, I have to go and explore that distribution of the bar chart that you're accidental learning.
Oh, I'm gonna find that because that was really good. So I was literally in a demo doing it. Oh, also the new homepage. I'm not a massive fan. I want more control over it, but this search functionality is absolutely incredible. When you've got multiple workspaces, changed my life.
Yeah, especially for people who are already using Teams quite a lot. They don't know how many workspaces they already has access to. And this is a great way to actually search.
Yeah, so this is the example I was looking at. So here we've got complaints by the category of complaint, high to low. If we look at find where this distribution is different, just like with the changes over time, this is looking, this is where I just keep padding until it generates. This says, for different services, where is that distribution different? So for the assessment team, they had many more complaints around financial reasons, council housing repairs, more around accommodation, delays, waste operations, more about service quality. So these are things that you would click through the different visuals on your page and you could filter and find that, but this is actually looking where that distribution is different based on all the different columns that you've got within your data set.
Yeah, that's cool. I was
I
feel like I spend a lot of time with Power BI and I don't actually.
And this is my point about if you've got junk in your data model, so here I've got some leftover GUIDs, you're going to see GUIDs. Who knows what they might relate to. So,
That's amazing. But you know what? While I was typing these notes, I learned there is a bar chart emoji. So there was this accidental learning as well. But on that note, thank you so much. It's really insightful. I hope you all enjoyed. And I'm also hoping pizza arrived. Yes? Oh, there you go. So before somebody go and sneak in, help themselves, let's go downstairs and enjoy our pizza. And I'm hoping to see more submissions for the PUG challenge. Yes? Please? And I'll see you next month. Thank you.
thank you.